The air in the capital is tense, and the rhetoric is fiery. On this September day, President Nicolás Maduro stood before reporters and television cameras to deliver a statement that, once again, has thrust Venezuela into the center of international attention. His claim, the United States is preparing an aggression, not just a political provocation or a diplomatic quarrel, but what he described as an aggression of a military nature. Maduro declared that Venezuela, under international law, holds the legitimate right to defend itself against such threats. He argued that what the world is witnessing is not tension, but aggression, systematic, deliberate, and multi-layered. In his words, judicial aggression through the criminalization of his government and its officials, political aggression through daily hostile statements, diplomatic aggression through isolation efforts, and now a visible aggression in the form of military maneuvers just offshore. The US Navy, for its part, has deployed warships in the Caribbean, officially under the justification of an anti-drug operation. Washington insists that its presence in the region is meant to disrupt narcotics trafficking routes used by transnational cartels. Yet in Caracas, the interpretation is starkly different. Maduro and his officials view this deployment as an unmistakable threat, an escalation that could place Venezuela's sovereignty in jeopardy. He warned the world that Venezuela is being cornered, not merely by political pressure or economic sanctions, but by what he sees as a creeping military encirclement. His words carried a tone of defiance. Venezuela, he said, will confront this aggression comprehensively with every tool available, diplomatic, political, and if necessary, military. The statement comes against a backdrop of long-standing hostility between the United States and Venezuela. Since the year 2019, when Washington and a coalition of allies recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as interim president, relations between the two countries have been all but severed. Sanctions on Venezuela's vital oil industry, restrictions on banking and trade, and diplomatic isolation have all combined to create one of the most tense and hostile bilateral relationships in the Western Hemisphere. To Maduro, these sanctions are not a policy tool, but a weapon, a deliberate attempt to destabilize his government and to force regime change. Now, as US naval vessels patrol waters not far from Venezuela's coast, he presents the situation as a continuation of that same campaign. He accused Washington of waging what he called a total aggression, first in the courts, then in the halls of diplomacy, next in the political arena, and finally on the open seas. To Venezuelans, Maduro's speech was designed to send a message of resistance and sovereignty. To his critics abroad, it was another example of the president rallying domestic support by invoking an external enemy. Either way, the effect was immediate. Headlines across the region captured his fiery declaration that Venezuela will defend itself at all costs. The timing of this speech is significant. The United States has heightened its naval presence in the Caribbean multiple times in recent years, often framing such deployments as counter-narcotics operations. Yet each time, Caracas has responded with accusations of imperial aggression. This cycle of action and reaction has deepened mistrust and widened the gap between the two nations. Maduro's insistence that this is not tension, but aggression, highlights his broader strategy of reframing US actions as direct assaults on Venezuela's sovereignty. By grouping judicial cases, diplomatic measures, political statements, and military operations under the single banner of aggression, he paints a picture of a nation besieged on every front. In his framing, Venezuela is not isolated or weakened, but embattled, standing firm against a superpower that seeks to dismantle it. This confrontation is not without precedent. Venezuela has often accused Washington of using naval deployments as cover for larger geopolitical goals. Analysts point to the country's vast oil reserves, the largest proven reserves in the world, as a key factor in this enduring rivalry. For Maduro and his allies, the belief is clear. The United States' real interest lies not in combating drug trafficking, but in exerting control over Venezuela's resources and, by extension, its political future. In Washington, officials reject that narrative. They insist that sanctions are aimed at human rights abuses, corruption, and the erosion of democratic institutions under Maduro's rule. They argue that the naval operations are part of a broader regional strategy to combat organised crime. Yet perception often shapes reality in international politics, and in Venezuela, the perception is one of an imminent threat. The implications for the wider region are serious. Latin America has long been divided in its approach to Maduro's government. Countries like Mexico and Brazil have called for dialogue and negotiation, hoping to avoid confrontation. Others, often aligned with US policy, push for harder measures, seeing Maduro as an illegitimate leader clinging to power through repression. The presence of US warships in the Caribbean, interpreted by Maduro as a prelude to aggression, risks polarizing the hemisphere further. At the United Nations, Venezuela has repeatedly sought to frame US sanctions and military maneuvers as violations of international law. Maduro's latest remarks continue that line, positioning his country as a victim of unlawful aggression and demanding recognition of its right to defend itself. Whether this framing gains traction internationally remains to be seen, but within Venezuela, it reinforces a narrative of national resistance against foreign domination. Beyond the immediate confrontation, there is a human dimension. Venezuela has endured years of economic crisis, hyperinflation, shortages, and mass emigration. For many Venezuelans, the political standoff with Washington feels distant compared to the daily struggle for food, medicine, and basic security. Yet Maduro's strategy has often been to use external threats to unite the nation internally, to rally citizens around the flag when domestic discontent runs high. His fiery warnings of aggression serve that political purpose, even as they raise the stakes internationally. The longer-term question is whether this rhetoric marks a turning point toward real military confrontation. The US Navy's presence, while described as an anti-drug mission, is undeniably a show of force. Maduro's pledge to respond comprehensively leaves open a wide range of possibilities, from diplomatic appeals to international bodies to military mobilizations along Venezuela's coast. In a region where memories of Cold War interventions linger, the risk of escalation cannot be dismissed. For now, what is clear is that the confrontation between Caracas and Washington has entered a new and dangerous phase. Maduro has accused the United States of preparing a military aggression. The US has denied such intentions, framing its operations as law enforcement missions, but the language, the timing, and the symbolism have heightened tensions at a moment when both nations remain deeply entrenched in their positions. In Caracas, the message from Maduro is unequivocal. Venezuela will not yield. It will resist judicial aggression, political hostility, diplomatic isolation, and, if it must, military intimidation. In Washington, the strategy remains one of pressure and containment. Between these two narratives lies a volatile reality, one that could shape not only Venezuela's future, but the broader stability of the region. The cameras captured Maduro's defiance, his words carried across national television, and his warning delivered to the world. Whether this is the prelude to negotiation, confrontation, or something far more dangerous remains uncertain. But one fact is beyond dispute. The standoff between the United States and Venezuela is once again at the forefront of global attention, and the risks of escalation have rarely been higher.